Yeah. Sorry?
Yes.
I'm moving to the side event, the cities.
I think he had to go yesterday. So, are we live?
Hi, let's start this session. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those that are following us virtually. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm leading the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this very important session. Yes, assessing compatibility with 1.5 degree, but doing it in a way that is holistic, that encompasses not only climate objectives, but also all the other sustainability objectives is extremely important. And this is actually core to the objective and approach of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. What we are really promoting is of focusing at the sectoral level, where we will try to see how innovation can help make incremental change. We would like to go back to the core human needs, that the process and their product are satisfying, and reflect on how innovation can be used where the product and services do not fit with the climate and sustainability goal, how innovation can be used to make this product redundant by disrupting the value chain they are coming from. And innovation needs to support the development of alternative value chain that not only will satisfy the needs, but also will do it in a way that is providing flourishing life, in a way that is aligned with all the other sustainability goals, supporting enhanced biodiversity, supporting enhanced land regeneration, and fitting within the planetary boundary. So without further ado, I will hand over to Dennis, who will be moderating this session. Dennis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Samba. And this is, just to remind people out there that this is the solution day of COP. But we don't have a way of measuring solutions yet. So it's really strange. We are COP27, and still the major way for a company to show leadership is to reduce their emissions to zero. It's not to deliver solutions to society. It's really bizarre. But that's also why I'm so happy to have some of the leaders of the work to actually develop ways to support and assess solutions and their impact. Can you put on the slide, please? Or maybe I can I use the slide deck? Yes. So my name is Dennis Pamlin. I'm the Executive Director of Mission Innovations Net Zero Compatibility Initiative. And we were created back after the Paris meeting. Because then finally the major countries with innovations, including Japan, Sweden, came together with some of the leading business people and said, why aren't we bringing innovations to the table? And we then set up a target and said that let's bring innovation that can show at least 60 gigatons of solutions. That's basically the global emissions, a bit more. And so we have those solutions. It's not just about reducing emissions from the old system, it's about bringing new solutions. And those of you who have heard me before, I usually said, if we would have the reduction agenda 30 years ago when the climate issue started, you would sit here with fossil-free typewriters instead of smart mobile phones, because the internet did not exist 30 years ago. But still today, we're not really looking at tomorrow's smart solutions. We're asking companies only to reduce their emissions. And one of the first ones that really stepped up to the plate were ICT companies, and I'll come back to that, because for them it was obvious that much of their impact was not on their own, but was the new solutions they were giving to society. So I don't think there's a coincidence also that a very high-tech country like Japan is taking the lead on this. But one thing that I hope we will do also together, all us who have done this, is try to show the long history we've had. Because my work with avoided emissions started basically back 2002 with Sustainability Speed of Light at the Johannesburg Summit. And I did my first assessment together with Ethno back in 2006. So we've been going on this for a while now, and this is just an overview of some of the main things that I'm aware of. But I hope we can populate this also, because some people think that avoided emissions is a new concept, it's something strange. But solution providers, and especially the digital companies, have saying that for decades now, that we need to look at us. Don't treat us only as problems, treat us as solution providers. And of course, we think today virtual meetings didn't exist 30 years ago. Car sharing didn't exist 30 years ago. All these things have been driven not because of climate regulations, but in spite of. These companies, if you look at the Teslas of the world or the Zooms of the world, they've been driving these not because they've been pushed by environmental people. Most of those have asked, how do we get a more environment-friendly airplane? Not asking, how can we have virtual meetings? So we really need to step back and have this solution agenda, because otherwise we will not really get into this. And there are two things that I think is important to stress also, why I think now is the right time after Paris. Because when I was in Japan 1997 for the Kyoto Protocol, all the big companies, especially the American companies, fossil companies, were against climate action. They had the Global Climate Coalition who explicitly didn't want us to take climate action. So very much of the focus back in the 90s was to create transparency and ask companies to report emissions and to do cost-efficient measures. And that is very much of the mindset we still have today, 2022. It's about transparency and reporting your emissions. But in Kyoto, we took the first important step to ask the rich countries to report some of their emissions. The goal was 5% emission reductions aggregated. Now, in the 2020s, after the Paris Agreement, we're looking at global emission zero for the whole population. And then, I know this is controversial, but that's why avoided emissions is so important also, because for most of the world, reducing emissions is not the most important thing. It's avoiding emissions as you move out of poverty, because it's only the global elite, basically, that is really contributing to this global challenge. The richest 10% of the world is emitting 50%. So the fact that we say, set reduction targets, why? Set avoided emission targets. Show how you can eat, move, educate, get health in a sustainable way. So we shouldn't focus on just reducing emissions from the old systems. We should focus on providing flourishing lives for everyone on this planet. And that's why this avoided emissions is so important, because it's about moving towards the future and say, I can deliver these solutions in a sustainable way. But it's also, and I'm so happy again that Japan is here represented, because Japan has been in the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution. How do we use robotics in healthcare? How do we use smart digital solutions? That is very much the new world we looked at, because before the fourth industrial revolution, the world thought, oh, you have a problem with transportation. Reduce emissions from the cars. Many Western countries now have a policy of saying, electrify the cars. That's okay, it's not bad, but as OECD has shown, it's not a smart strategy. Because today, you can build cities with smart ICT to sort of plan it, so you can walk instead. You can have 3D printers to print your things. You can have drones delivering your medicine. There's so many other ways to provide the access that people need. Because we don't need cars, we need access. And car is one way of providing access, but there's so many other ways of providing access to health, education, etc. So that's also where we have this amazing opportunity to bring in solution providers and those with innovations to this ecosystem. Because most of the challenge now is that we ask the worst polluters to say, reduce your emissions. And of course they say, it's impossible. But if you turn around and say, who can provide the smart solutions and have a race to the top, that would be a very different job. I still think we should have challenges for the big polluters and reduce their emissions, but I hope that the next COP will have a solution agenda also, where companies who provide avoided emissions are given the main stage. And now with Japan also, and we'll hear more about that, it's actually going to bring that to the G7. It's going to be part of the global agenda. And that's what we have worked together with Samba, UNFCCC, but also with cities, other kind of organization with what we call this expanded innovation agenda. We like that companies are the sources of emissions and sectors are setting their targets, but that's a static problem approach. Keep on doing that, but we also need to acknowledge that we need to focus on human needs and those who can deliver solutions on that. And that is what we call a dynamic solution approach. And companies need to do both. They need to reduce their own emissions and see how they improve, but they also need to innovate and ask, what are the next solutions that I can provide to give people better healthcare and better education, better access to nutritional food, etc. So it's really about shifting the focus away from looking at everyone as a problem. And this also goes for cities. We have a challenge, and I hope we will have some Japanese cities also that don't just say that they're going to reduce emissions, but they're going to bring their startup community. They're going to show the incubators and say, we want to export these solutions. So we as cities, we're not just problems, we are also solution providers. So it's not just the companies, it's also the cities, but also the countries. We have actually, India and Sweden have produced export gigaton reports, and I would like to invite and hope to do that together with Japan also, and just show that you have lots of these solutions already ready to export. Because I think Japan is one of those countries who's a clear winner in an international low carbon economy, and we should look more to Japan, not just asking Japan and saying how much are you reducing, but also how much are you giving to the world. And that is not Japan. All the countries should ask themselves, how do we export? Because it's a much foreign discussion to have with the country, saying how much can you give and earn money to solve the climate challenge, not just reduce your emissions. And that's what we've been developing, this methodology, and we've had discussions with METI and others during their development. So I think we have a reasonable consensus around how to use dual LCA's life cycle assessment, where you compare baseline with the new ones and say, it's not a perfect one, but it allows you to have an idea on how much you help society move forward. But I also would like to stress already now that a lot of people who think avoided emissions, they think scope 1, 2, 3. And it's like avoided emissions is scope 4. No. Scope 1, 2, 3 is compliance. It's a risk agenda. You need to be very specific about the numbers. Avoided emissions is a strategic tool to know that you go in the right directions. Those numbers will never be perfect, but they are usually much more important for a company to plan and be strategic for what you're going to offer in the future. So I think it's very important that we clarify that some people call it scope 4. We recommend not using that. We say avoid emissions or 1.5 compatibility or mitigation efforts like Japan has used, as long as we don't, that we're clear that this is not an accounting mechanism. This is not about finding the exact numbers, it's about finding the direction of societal development. But, and this is the crux that we found, it's very many drivers that are different from avoided emissions. And we should not fool ourselves. There are groups, most of the incubators and startups that we work with in Mission Innovation, they want to build this 1.5 compatible global future. Many of the large companies are much more insecure. Some of them want to use the avoided emissions to be able to claim be net zero and report net zero. Some of them want to have some marketing for existing products, and you say, look, these are avoiding emissions. So, and some of them want to find cost-efficient solutions and identify new markets. All of those can be good, but it's important that we understand it could be the Department of PR and Reporting, it can be the R&D department, it could be the sales department, it could be the strategic department. So there are different drivers here, and we need to be aware of that. That's not a bad thing, but we need to be clear that there are different kind of drivers. And I think we focus a little bit too much on the greenwashing side and too little on the strategic planning side. What is that shapes companies' plans? When they develop their new products and services, when they develop the new strategies, how have they used avoided emissions and 1.5 compatibility in that work? That they identify the markets. And that's where I'm happy to also now launch this web page where we bring all these, or not that many actually, well actually if you go to the web page now, it's actually 17 tools and initiatives that are, and most of those are actually on this panel now, but that we found around that really try to work with companies as solution providers. And we have already done 6,400 for those collectively, more probably. All have not reported how many assessments they've done. And together, those represent more than 118 gigaton in potential. Of course, all of that will not happen, but it shows that we have more than double of the potential that global needs already out there. So why aren't we discussing that more, that there are so many of these solutions available? And we also wanted to bring different kind of stakeholders. Like METI here, for instance, they're providing guidance now for how to assess that. And there are others that do that IRIS, and we do that also, Net Zero initiatives and others are doing that. There are also some people who do a little bit of or mainly footprint work, that GRI and CDP, that also do a little bit of recommendations. But we also have those who do support solution providers, like Boston Consulting Group, who are developing a project to help companies move from what is called a climate risk innovation agenda, where they reduce their own emissions, to climate opportunity agenda. So we wanted to bring all these things together, and also those who do both. And what we want to do now is basically ask you, everyone out there, what do you think is important? What do you want to know? So we started to ask people in this community and people who use this, and they wanted to know, who is it for? Is it for investors? Is it for companies? Is it for startups? Is it for incubators? Is it for policymakers? Who's your target group when you make these avoided emissions? When you talk about avoided emissions, what are you talking about? Are you talking about any avoided emissions? Or you talk about 1.5 compatible? Or you talk about 1.5 compatible global sustainability, more like the P1 pathway for IPCC? Or you talking more of P4, that just is non-sustainable and require lots of CCS and renewable energy, that is not compatible with biodiversity? So what are you including? And we think you can't include everything, so it's not bad that some are ignoring certain aspects, but we should be aware of those things. And also the time horizon, are you looking to the future, or are you looking now? So all these things, but if you have any suggestion what you think is important, add this, and we will classify that. And well, I'll come back to that also later, but because this is an interactive thing. So then we had a little bit of a opportunity and challenges to show that different tools have different strengths and different weaknesses. Some of them are helping companies to be even better in developing those solutions. Some of them are very quick and easy to use. Sometimes that's a balance. The one that is quick and easy to use might not help the company to improve their impact, but the one that improves the impact might not be so quick and easy. So we're not trying to say that anyone needs to be all positive. There are different trade-offs that need to be made. So there's room for different solutions and different initiatives. And I think also we see already now that there are those who go into trying to have more machine learning and very quick, simple tools, and there are those who say we need much more effort to really work with a new generation of solution providers, the deep tech, that is unclear how they actually reduce their emissions. And then it's up to you and say, what do you want to find? So depending on what you then fill in here, different solutions or different tools and initiatives will fall out. But if you then fall in something, say, this is what I want, then this tool says, there is no framework initiative that meets all your criteria. Would you like to make people aware of this? So it's really meant to be a user-driven process also, that people say, I think this is really important. There's no tool right now that is addressing this. So that's also where we wanted to have this communication, because it's not for us tool developers, it's really, at the end, it's users. It's the startups, it's the governments, it's the business who needs to say, what do they need for this to be meaningful? And Jakob Dahlqvist, who's also on this call, has been instrumental in leading much of these assessment works. And if you have any questions or want to pick up, you see Jakob.Dahlqvist at rise.se, because this is all about, when you look at the webpage, you will see also, we love feedback. It's basically on every page, so wherever you think should be improved, etc., let us know. This is a work in progress, and it's for you to start moving forward with whatever you think is important. But I'm really happy to see that we have Solution Day now, and the fact that we're starting to look at avoided emissions that are so important for the global population. It was only yesterday or the day before yesterday when we reached 8 billion people. And I think for us to really think global, not the global north reducing their emissions, but sustainable solutions for everyone on the planet, that is really where this shines. So that's where I'm going to end the introduction of the framework, just to give a little bit of background. And now we're going to jump in. And because we have people at different places, we actually have Luis Neves in Japan. It's quite late, so he's on a dinner and will come in a bit later. But we also have friends from the US who are on the West Coast, and they are in the middle of the night right now. So they have recorded, they have a movie, and they want us to share some messages from them. So let me jump over now and take the role of Crane and Prime, who is one of the most exciting initiatives in this field in terms of working with quick and easy assessment for startups. So they have already 3,200 users with about 1,500 organizations, and they estimate that they have about 100 gigatons in potential emissions reductions by 2040. And it's part of Project Frame that is also trying to find these methodologies and standards, especially for the investment community, what they focus on. How should we invest? As you probably know also, much of the climate discussions have been about divesting, removing your money from the coal and dirty technologies. And of course that's one part, but an investor wants to invest in something. So that's also where we need this guidance for that. And with that, I would like to see if we can test the movie from...
Humanity's chances for combating climate change depend on our ability to harness the power of innovation. But to achieve the speed and scale required to meet the 2 degrees Celsius warming threshold agreed to in the Paris Accords, we need new technologies across a wide range of sectors. Impact-oriented investors have to make hard bets in a short amount of time. Failing to identify which ventures hold the highest potential for impact could lead us to channel capital to suboptimal solutions. Prime Coalition's programs catalyze the development of leaders, tools, and industries with strong potential to achieve long-lasting solutions in climate change. We laser focus on bringing value and impact that others are not, because overlooked innovation and overlooked people are missed opportunities. As part of the mission, in 2020, Prime, in partnership with Row Impact, launched the Crane tool, transforming intuitive decisions around technology impact potential to quantitative, data-driven decisions. In 2022, Prime launched Project Frame to galvanize investors around climate impact standards and best practices for assessment. Together, these two initiatives work in tandem to mainstream impact accountability within the investment community.
Technological innovations alone will not save our warming planet. We must work together to innovate how we invest in technologies and hold ourselves accountable to our impact alongside our financial returns.
So that was just a quick overview, but that's one focus on incubators, startups, and the investment community, so which is also very important, but it just shows a little bit of the different stakeholders. Much of this work has actually been doing for startups. And could you turn on the panel with the virtual participants? Fantastic. And I'd like to start by giving the floor to one of our close partners we've been working with for a long time, Bram, who's been doing lots of similar work in terms of trying to develop a framework and help startups to get onto the market. Bram, the floor is yours. Bram, we can't hear you. but I. So there will be just a technical glitch, but as you saw there from the presentation and something we've been working with some of the stakeholders, is not just on avoided emissions, but 1.5 compatibility. And that's also something that we think is very interesting to move up now on the agenda. How do we assess that it's 1.5 compatible? Because we've seen some companies trying to claim rapid emission reductions, for instance, by efficiency in a coal power plant. And of course that helps avoid emissions, but it might lock us in to something that is not really going to 1.5 compatibility. Or we also seen things like a shift in fossil fuel to biofuel in airlines. That is also not compatible with a 1.5 compatible equitable world, because everyone cannot use the kind of airlines that we have in the West and using biofuel. It's not just enough fuel there. So there's also these kind of assessments saying this might count and might be a bridging fuel, but if we don't have some sort of warnings in that. Oh, sorry, are you with us now, Bram?
I am. Yeah, I thought I was, but here we are. Where was the connection cut off from the beginning?
Say something.
I'm saying something. Perhaps I'm not getting through.
So you're on.
Are people in the Teams call hearing me? Can you nod if, yeah. But at the conference I'm not audible, I believe, right? Or I would get a reaction.
Please start your presentation, Bram.
I will, and I hope you can hear me. Oh, great. Okay, sorry. Sorry for the wait. So at Impact Forecast, we make impact data and expertise available to anyone using an online tool. This makes it easier for companies to make assessments directly. So in the old situation, you would need experts and you would need to pay them well to access LCA data and tools that only experts can use. And this is just making it too expensive and too slow to guide innovations towards positive impact. So what we're doing is making LCA tools more easy and more accessible so that companies can make self-assessments, but then call on experts when and where they need it in order to provide validation. We're doing this with a team of impact assessment experts that have so far supported over 3,000 companies for the clients that we work for, funds and investors. And the potential impact that we validated is currently 6 megatons, but I'll show you later how that's separate from, this is just for 110 companies out of those 3,000. My name's Bram and I'm a design engineer by trade, working on lifecycle assessment in the context of product design, and with this core team, we're steering this company. Working for clients, as you can see here, that are funds or investors that have an interest in promoting the positive impact agenda, that are investing in startups from a very early stage, but also sometimes in SMEs. And more, and I think that's a promising movement, we see national funds aspiring to set up programs to promote sustainable action through innovative solutions. The method we use towards the end users, so those people that are funded, the entrepreneurs, is that we help them to know their impact first using a calculation tool, and then to grow their impact using impact expert support and also improving assessments over time. And we also have formats for showing impact, for example, impact pitch presentations or impact reports or validation reports. And this all happens on a platform where clients can also do some monitoring and dissemination of the products and services we offer. And at the core of it, it's not our only tool, but at the core of it is the climate impact forecast tool, which makes life cycle assessment a lot more manageable for an entrepreneur. Also make sure that you have integrated LCA data, which makes it much easier to get to that elusive life cycle inventory. And it provides direct feedback. So even before you're done assessing your first product, you already have insights on, for example, where the weights and balances are in making a more positive impact product. The core of our work is training entrepreneurs to do this themselves. So they need to obtain some life cycle assessment knowledge, and this happens in a workshop, which is a highly engaging one-day event. So in just one day, people can learn to use this tool and develop insights for their own innovation. That is supported then through coaching, because impact experts are needed to pick out some of the more complex issues. And also validation. This is a process where a third-party expert is checking all of the assumptions that go into the calculation, deciding whether the end result is valid or not. And out of that, we produce validation reports where anyone, it's really aimed at investors, but anyone can get a very good understanding of the impact and the levers of impact that a company has. So out of this work, we have seen one remarkable pattern, and that is that there are differences in impact that are truly huge. So one innovation is able to reduce many more greenhouse emissions than another innovation. And we are trying to show investors which ones are those impact unicorns that you want to chase after. Here you can see an anonymized list of just a handful of companies, and for example, this 5x difference is quite visible, but what is almost invisible in a linear plot like this is 1,000x difference. So there are companies that have 1,000 times the impact of another company, both of which are interesting, future-oriented new technologies. So imagine comparing that to an economic return of once your investment, or 100 times, or 100,000 times. And we believe it's important to unlock this insight to investors, because currently they're mostly looking at the financials, looking for this ROI, but the impact ROI actually differs a lot more. There's a lot bigger range. More so, if you ask companies to provide this information early, they become better investment objects by the time you invest in them, because they will already have impact insights rather than waiting for those more elaborate and expensive consultancy solutions. So reflecting on our work, the impact between companies can differ quite a lot. When we teach entrepreneurs to work with our tools, they're actually enjoying it a lot. So it takes time from them, but they get a lot out of it. The impact calculations improve over time, and there's often surprise to exactly what to improve on, for example, the product. And we also see that our LCA experts remain needed, so it's not possible to train an entrepreneur entirely in this field. Moving forward, we're expanding into ecosystems, and here's another couple of tools that we're developing. Mentioned already was Scope 4, so we're working on a Scope 1, 2, 3, 4 assessment tool. And moving into white label platform and capacity building solutions, where we are not the solution provider, but we train existing solution providers in our methods. So with that, I'd like to close in with the notion that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
Thank you very much, Bram. A little bit of applause for him. So, but I think there was one thing that I really wanted to stress there, and we had that when we were working with the Swedish Energy Agency also. People talk about climate solutions, but some of them are magnitudes better than others, and there's not really a discussion about that. As Bram was showing, they can be 1,000 times more efficient in terms of carbon abatement. And we've even had, and I don't know if you showed that also, Bram, but there are those with negative impacts who call themselves climate solutions, or those with no impact. And because so much focus has been on reporting and claiming net zero, we have lots of consultants now helping companies to buy green electricity. But that doesn't necessarily make any changes in society. It allows you to report, but that doesn't really drive the new innovation. So there's also this tension between what do we claim and what is actual solutions in society. Who are companies to provide a solution that helps society reduce emissions? And when do you help a company report less emissions? So that's really interesting. And it's also in terms of really putting that focus on solution providers. I'd like to invite Antoine from Carbon 4, because I think you've done a great job in trying to help companies saying that net zero might not be a very good way of framing your thinking, because that takes you down to zero only, and then you start mixing solutions with emissions rather than really taking this avoid emissions approach. So Antoine, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Denise. I hope you can all hear me well. So my name is Antoine Crépe, and I'm consultant at Carbon 4 and member of the Net Zero Initiative team. So Net Zero Initiative is a project imagined and led by the consulting firm Carbon 4, which started in 2018 now. It aims to develop a new framework for action for companies that wish to contribute to achieving global carbon neutrality in an ambitious and transparent way. It offers an alternative to the simplistic claims of carbon neutrality and offsetting often used by companies. And as you can see on the screen, the framework is based on 3 pillars. So pillar A is carbon footprint reduction. Pillar B is increase avoided emissions by the products and services sold, so reduce others' emissions. And pillar C is about preserving and developing carbon sinks inside and outside companies' value chain. So for my part, I specifically work for the pillar B of Net Zero Initiative, so the one tackling avoided emission, which is appropriate for today's discussion. So now our vision on avoided emission. So we see avoided emissions as a tool to go beyond the main limits of a corporate climate action based only on carbon footprint reduction. Indeed, a company's performance on carbon footprint reduction does not fully reflect the contribution of the products and services it sells to the fight against climate change. A company that reduces its emissions in absolute terms can contribute to very carbon-intensive activities. For example, an airline that reduces its absolute emissions by losing market share. And a company that increases its emissions can be virtuous in terms of climate action. For example, a bicycle manufacturer or heat pump manufacturer that is expanding. So the big question avoided emissions should help to answer is, are the products and services I sell contributing at the right level to achieving global net zero? So 3 important points here. So first one is to meet our climate targets and avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Transformative change is urgently needed. 2, carbon footprint reduction of companies is absolutely necessary but insufficient. And 3, avoided emissions is a good tool to help companies put climate action at the very heart of their strategy. So with the Net Zero Initiative, we have published a guidance before summer this year to detail the calculation rules and methodologies for avoided emissions. And we are also very pleased to work with WBCSD to co-publish this methodology on avoided emissions very soon. The good point we see today is that there is really an increased interest of companies towards avoided emissions. On the other hand, the risk with that is that some use the occasion to communicate in an inappropriate way. So the aim of these guidances is to ensure the highest possible integrity of claims on avoided emissions, to maximize the positive impact of companies on their ecosystem and avoid greenwashing. So avoided emissions is a powerful tool company can use to fundamentally transform their activities and maximize their contribution to global net zero with 2 main pillars of action. The first one is act on what it sells by transforming its business model and shift portfolio to solutions that avoid emissions. And the second one is act on whom it sells to by targeting end markets that maximize the decarbonizing impact of the solution. Now, if we take a step back to go beyond avoided emissions in order to ensure their relevance in the low carbon transition, companies must also ensure that the solutions they sell are compatible with a 1.5 decarbonization pathway. In fact, in our view, questioning on strategy portfolio compatibility with the low carbon transition should be one of the first steps of company climate action. So there is a huge need to change the way companies think about their strategy for them to really become solutions provider to build a 1.5 compatible economy. And to do so, avoided emissions can be complemented with other methodologies like scenario analysis, for example, that we are developing too at Carbon4. Also, we are developing with the Net Zero Initiative a new climate indicator to assess the compatibility of companies' portfolio with a 1.5 scenario. I don't have time to enter into details now, but it is an indicator based on the carbon intensity of end users served by the company. So to conclude, several next steps on our side. First one is to produce a methodology to help companies set their target on avoided emissions. So it is a work in progress now, and it will be published very soon. We also want to publish sectorial guidances to apply methodologies on avoided emissions to specific sectors. And third big step is to continue to develop the indicator to assess the compatibility of companies' portfolio with a 1.5 scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antoine. And I think that's it. This is also showing the scope, from the startups coming with solutions. Carbon4 has done a really good work in terms of helping companies who think in scope 1, 2, 3 expand that thinking. Then there are others, Marco was going to talk about later, those who come in from an innovation perspective and might not even care about the reporting, but really use this as a sales driving force. So there's so many different approaches, and what I think is important is that there's not a tension and fight between them, but saying we're all trying to move towards a solution agenda. But without that, I'd like to introduce the star of today, after Japan made the fantastic announcement of avoided emissions being part of the G7. Your work on developing the methodology, and as I said, Japan has been, especially the IT companies, have been part of this journey since at least 20 years now. So I'm really glad to hand over to you and hear your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Tomoki Ooka from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. Thank you very much for coming here today. Well, and thanks to Dennis, because it's so awkward because this avoided emission concept, you can it's starting to start everywhere. And then we had a really big international conference on avoided emission on October. And then Dennis saw the conference and then he contacted me and then we got connected. And then we're here 1 month later. So it's amazing to see that this discussion is coming to the mainstream. And first of all, Dennis, you kindly mentioned about innovation as a really strong point of Japan. But before I just jump into what I want to say about avoided emission, I just want to ask all of you if you have ever been to the Japan Pavilion, because it's not just about talking. We have the solutions, the technologies that are presented in the pavilion. If you want to see, have you ever seen a carbon negative concrete? If you want to see it, you can go to the Japanese pavilion, which is not so far from here. If you want to see a system that combines hydrocell fuels, photovoltaics, and storage battery that's made from Panasonic, you can see it in the Japanese pavilion. You can see a lot of technologies in Japanese pavilion that will contribute to global emission reduction. So if you have a chance or free time, please have a chance to go. So I just wanted to start off that Japan has a lot of technologies, but the difficult thing about technologies is that we're thinking of way of how the technologies can be positively evaluated. Because think about a company. It makes a really green product or service and it diffuses it to the world. It contributes to global emission reduction. There's no proper way that evaluates that positive effect right now. Right now, as Dennis has perfectly mentioned, emitting is still considered as a risk, but we want to think of avoiding emission as an opportunity. So that's why Japan, as a country with a lot of technologies and solutions, are really thinking into this avoided emission concept. So, Dennis talked a lot about the life cycle or social change kind of stuff. I want to talk a little more deep into the product side. So as I just mentioned, if you make a really green product, then, and then that should be positively, evaluated. But it's not just about like saying, oh, you have a good avoided emission. And that's, if it's just like that, that's not gonna connect to the real actual system. So I think I can jump a little more into how you can connect this avoided emission to the real society. And that's where finance comes into play. What I mean is like, if you think about a company A and company B, they both have the same scope 1, 2, 3 emission. But if company A has much more global impact to emission reduction, if you are an investor, wouldn't you think you would like to invest on company A rather than company B? And if that kind of system gets created, like if the financial sectors are starting to consider that a company with better avoided emissions should be the one that should be invested, then that starts to become a value when companies with greater avoided emission get the finance that they need to contribute to global emission reduction. And this discussion, we had an event on the 14th in the Japanese pavilion. I have to say that it was very crowded with over 100 people. We only had 50 seats, so 50 were standing actually. But we had a really wonderful event. And within the event, not only Japan, not only about the business sector, but like WBCSD, which I think we'll be having later on. Alex will be on the, will be on the panelists later on, I think. But WBCSD, who founded the Scope 1, 2, 3 concept. We also had not only the WBCSD, but also GFANS as a financial sector considering this avoided emission in a positive way. We also had UAE, COP27 presidency in the discussion. We also had the United States in the discussion. And this discussion, it's not only about the private sector. We have to think about collaborating all of the stakeholders that are related, that should be considering this avoided emission all together, and then make it into the system. So I think this concept of avoided emission, it's starting really to get into place of the real place of climate. And I hope that the people here today can like start getting a better understanding of not only understanding emission as a risk, but starting to understand reducing emission, global emission reduction as an opportunity. And I just want to like point out two more points. One is about what the government is doing as a role. What is the role of the government? This discussion, as Dennis has pointed out, this discussion has already started from the early 2000 something. But the government level, I have been in the negotiations about the G7, G20, COP issues, about the negotiations, but this avoided emission doesn't come into the governmental discussion. And we have to bring it on to the governmental discussion to have this fly, because we can't just have the private sector do this. We have to bring it on to the table of the governmental discussion. So that's one of the important things that me or us as a government have to do and display to these kind of pavilions and events. So that's one point I wanted to mention about the role of the government. And the second point I wanted to mention is about how we should move this discussion forward. And as I mentioned, we had a good discussion with not only WBCSD, but we also had a good discussion with GFANS. So what is the next step? What I think right now is how we can connect it to the rating companies, perhaps like S&P, Moody's. If those kind of rating companies are collaborating an element of avoided emission into their rating system, then that will change a lot to the stock market. So I think I'm talking a little too much, but I'd like to end it here. But this concept, we think it's really important. We're not going to just end it at discussing at COP. We're going to be raising as an important issue in the G7 next year, which Japan will be hosting as presidency. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the fruitful discussion we're going to have later on. Thank you.
No, it's okay. Tomoki, that was fantastic. I think you covered so many of those important parts, and I'd like just to highlight a few. We just launched a collaboration with ICLI, cities as solution providers. We hope that can also put some pressure on governments. But what we thought was very interesting, we did a scan with countries and cities. Most of the climate strategies did not acknowledge avoided emissions at all. But when we broaden the scope and look at export strategies, innovation strategies, then we found people saying, what are the export opportunities for low carbon solutions, etc. So it's not the Minister of Environment who's been leading the thinking, it's Minister of Export, Minister of Innovation has been looking at these things. So I think this is also a great opportunity to broaden the scope for stakeholders. Same thing when we've seen, and I think METI is uniquely positioned because you're a super department, but many others are much more divided in their responsibilities. And that's what we've seen also in cities, that even on the city level, if you come and ask them about climate, then they say, oh, we should reduce our emissions. But if you talk about them, fourth industrial revolution solutions, then they talk about export, incubators, solutions. So it's a different game, and that's why we have said that sometimes it's good to keep a bit of a distance between the scope 1, 2, 3, because that brings the reporting people and environmental people in. But if you start looking at income, fourth industrial revolution, you get other stakeholders. So that's, and the last thing that I just want to mention before I let in Gabby in, because I think she's, when you mentioned the finance sector's role, she started to smile, and you will understand soon why. But one thing that we've been working very much on is how do we help investors to link intangible assets to avoided emissions, because much of that is really about the kind of network you build out, the future-proofness, etc. I would argue that you can discuss how much Tesla is valued, if it's overvalued or not, but a lot of the real value is in Tesla being a leader, establishing itself as a solution provider, being invited by different governments to set up their structures, so they get a first mover advantage. Much of that is linked to their low carbon business model. So when companies start realizing that the valuation for the finance sector also comes into that, but we're a bit from that. But I'd like to invite Gabby, who's done some amazing work in this field and is one of those few still leaders who look at companies as solution providers in a way to assess that. Gabby, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation. So my name is Gabriela Herculano. Everybody calls me Gabby. I'm the CEO and co-founder of London-based green fintech iClima Earth. For the past 3 years, we've been looking at listed companies with shares in stock exchanges that preclude emissions from ever taking place. So we want to move away from business as usual, and we look for the companies that allow us to do that. So the world of ESG is very much still dominated by my ESG scorecard is better than yours, and representing decarbonization from the perspective of the companies doing less harm. Rightly so, good corporate citizens reducing their scope 2 emissions most and foremost. We need to shift the narrative. We need to desperately shift the narrative and focus on causation, not correlation. So the companies that are leading the way. So of course, potential avoided emissions is our key metric. It's a tangible indicator and it's forward looking. So it's not about looking, to the past and using black box ESG methodology. So BAE is fundamental to what we do. So today, I wanted to share some additional insights that together with BAE, we think bring our analysis to another level. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that is going to work. Just 1 second. So a very visual, I hope you can see this. Yes? So what is it that we're looking for? So yes, we look for the potential avoided emissions and we quantify that delta for the companies in our universe. We have about 450 companies in our universe that preclude emissions from ever taking place. Very quantitative. But if we look also with the point of view of how these solutions are converging and what is the full potential impact of the solutions, then we can make some additional distinctions. We see a profound, very positive, structural reshaping opportunity when it comes to our grid. And that is what distributed energy is. And those solutions, we summarize them as, we see them as green swans. They are here, they're being adopted for a variety of different reasons. We've never had a chance to produce electricity at the point of consumption, and now we can, and that makes economic sense. And their numbers are gigantic. In Europe, with Repower 55, we're going to be adding 600 gigawatts of solar to the grid by 2030, and half of all that electricity will be solar rooftops at the point of consumption. So you put together the stationary batteries, the batteries inside the cars as vehicles to grid, with the smart meters, smart thermostats, and we are reshaping building, transportation, and energy, converging these solutions in a profound way. So that's what we call a green swan. You move us away from business as usual, this centralized, fossil fuel-based, dated, old grid. In that context, we also look at nature-based solutions. Yes, they're very relevant from a CO2, but that's not avoiding emissions, that's sequestration. So although they can be impactful from a volume of CO2 equivalent, they are not necessarily going to reshape our industries and fundamentally solve some of our problems. Then we have some solutions in our universe that, yes, we are representing these companies, but they're very much nudging. Pollution control is an example. It is very much about doing that less harm, and with that, we don't really reshape the industries that are the cause of the problem. And then we have some alternatives, for example, like plant-based solutions that are relevant alternatives, but they're not scaling up fast enough to really be that material. So we want to look at these solutions from this point of view. Now, if we borrow from finance, I am a finance person, so if we borrow from finance a few additional concepts, we can also have some additional very important insights when it comes to underwriting. So time value of money is a concept very strong and very well understood in finance. $1 in your pocket now is worth more than $1 in the future. Well, so is the carbon that is never emitted into the atmosphere. The science is so clear, the carbon accounting is so clear, we're running out of time. So everything that moves the needle before 2030 has a much more material impact when it comes to that mitigation effort. So let's borrow also another concept from finance, which is return on invested capital. It's similar. It's what we call carbon returns. So how much do we need to invest? We have finite resources. How much do we need to invest in each of these solutions to really bring them to market in a very material way? So here we make a parallel with it's interesting that, Dennis, you're talking about BCG. The BCG 4x4 matrix is very well used and understood in another context. So we're applying this when it comes to this triangulation of potential avoided emissions with time value of carbon and carbon returns. So the green swans that we just saw in the previous slide, they are the stars. They are the solutions that really move us away fast with a material impact before 2030. And the investment is relevant investment, but it's not a unsurmountable amount, and they make a profound difference. So I mentioned distributed renewable energy that allows us to move away from our dated centralized fossil fuel grid and really reshape in a very material way the way we produce electricity. Cars will become computerized power plant on wheels, and when you add autonomous, which is a few years away, but when that happens, we're not going to have a car sitting idle for 90% of the time. That car will be used, and we're going to reshape transportation in a very profound way, and that is going to happen way before 2030. So here, opposite to the stars, we have these really big question marks. Potential zero impact before 2030, and extremely expensive and unproven technologies. That's where we put direct air capture. Is a pie in the sky, is not going to help us before 2030. If you are a lender, if you are the head of a bank, or if you are in a multilateral agency lending money to different projects, you need to take this into account. Am I going to finance a project that is going to have a very minimal impact before 2030 and it's unproven, it's going to cost so much? There are a lot of risks with that. Then, of course, we have solutions that, as of now, we are calling them the dogs, and I put green hydrogen there. We will potentially have to bring solutions to the hard-to-abate industries like fertilizers or steel. And green hydrogen is a little bit like the Swiss Army knife. It helps as a solution to all these hard-to-abate industries. But they're going to take a lot of time to develop. They're going to take a lot of money. The whole supply chain needs to unfold, from the electrolyzers to the fuel cells, to the way to store, to the way to transport, add nitrogen to then produce and store them as ammonia. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to cost a lot of money. Yes, they will be needed, but we need to see the solutions from this perspective. So to conclude, what I very much would like to emphasize is that when we come to potential avoided emissions and in the investment process, we need to do better. So from our perspective at iClima, when we look at these almost 500 companies in our universe, we look at them from this perspective. How much gigatons of CO2 equivalent they preclude from ever entering into the atmosphere. We are all agreeing that that's the best way to reduce carbon in the atmosphere by not emitting in the first place. Do they really reshape our industries in a very profound way? If they do, then of course we do believe that these are companies that can have a very potential upside potential when it comes to valuation and the investments, but it's much more than that. It is about looking at the ways that capital markets can be a source of good, and of course it must. Invisible hand eventually will work itself through, and capital will flow towards what really matters. But we have no time to waste, so we need to guide that invisible hand, and potential avoided emissions is at the center of this better process to underwrite investments. Let's triangulate, let's look at what moves the needle before 2030. Let's look at that carbon return, how much investment that is going to require, and let's look at all the solutions from this holistic point of view and move away from business as usual.
Thank you very much, Gabby. And I think that graph is really important in terms of if we start looking at avoided emissions and different kind of companies having different opportunities at different time horizons, but also different kind of business model transformation that are required. And I'd really like to hand over, as you were referring to Marco and the Boston Consulting Group's matrix that we developed for this avoided emissions work. Sorry. Oh, sorry. But before that, Louis has to leave because it's really late in Japan. So, Louis, let's talk about Digital with Purpose and the work you're doing with assessment.
Okay, well, very good, Dennis. Thank you so much for putting me in. And as you said, it's already very late. It's a pleasure to be here. And unfortunately, I could not follow all the conversation. But I think what is important is that I mentioned the work that GeSI has been doing in terms of the conversation that we are having here, which is the avoided emission conversations. So this is something that we have been addressing for quite a long time. It started in 2007 when we did our first Smart 2020 report. It continued in 2012 when we reviewed that report with the Boston Consulting Group, and then later on in 2015 with the Center Strategy, we went further in exploring how to calculate what we call the enabling impact of digital technologies in relation to climate change. We have broadened the conversation in 2019. We did the Digital with Purpose report. We correlated the 7 disruptive technologies with the Sustainable Development Goals and the 161 targets. And the conclusion was that digital was impacting in a positive manner 22% of the targets and minimizing the downtrend of 23% of them. So altogether, a positive impact of 45%. But the thing is, these are fantastic news. The question is, how do we really now drive an action agenda that is needed, an implementation agenda, really to harness the potential of digital and to contribute to accelerate and combat climate change. And so in that regard, we decided in GeSI to start a journey that we call the Digital with Purpose movement. And the movement is what we call, or we defined, as a race to the top. So it's about developing innovative solutions that respond to people's needs into 2050. And we are looking what kind of solutions are needed really to address the different components of the society and really contributing to climate change. We need a different approach. We need a different approach to innovation. We need to think that the world needs different type of solutions in 2050. And for that, we really to bring together the industry. To bring together the industry means to act and to join in a journey whereby we are able to measure impact. So we are moving away from the traditional ESG reporting. ESG reporting is not taking us anywhere. Actually, I think is one of the main reasons for greenwashing. It's a communication tool. It's not helping to make progress, and it's a business for many organizations. It's a vanity fair to many extents, and companies which are powerful, they can control communication. They use very much these types of platforms really to say that they are doing things that nobody is controlling. And we do not want to be part of that. We want digital with purpose to be a transparent movement whereby a set of indicators that we develop for the companies, and they should be seen as a tool. Those indicators around purpose, redefining the purpose of the companies, set of metrics around climate change, circular economy, supply chain impacts, digital inclusion, and privacy and security. And the third component of the metrics is around the enabling technologies and the innovations that really help the other industry sectors to combat climate change, like enabling the solutions for education, for health and well-being, for biodiversity, for human rights, and for climate change. So this digital repurpose movement is in this set of metrics. The companies that adhere to the movement, they commit to the movement, they need to evolve on the journey. And in that evolution, they will be certified in different levels. So the companies start by committing. The commitment needs to come from the CEO very high level. Once the CEO commits, the companies need to reply to that combined set of metrics, and they will be measured. And if they attain a certain level, they will be given the next level of certification. And that continues. We have defined 4 levels of certification, and no company can stay in the same level more than 3 years. So if they stay in the same level more than 3 years, they are not making progress. That means the company is not really interested in the movement, and there is no reason for them to stay. So it's important that companies are accountable. They really respond in a positive manner. They show that they are evolving, and they show that they are really making an impact. So this is, as I said, this is a tool, this is a movement, this is open to every single industry, every single sector. Although it's called digital repurpose, it's not only for digital companies. So digital cuts across every single industry today. It impacts the energy sector, the mobility sector, agriculture, manufacturing, education, health and well-being, and so on and so on. So this is designed for any company. It can be a bank, it can be an oil company, whatever company. All of them are invited to join the movement. But those that join the movement, they need to understand that this is not a reporting service. This is not a business model that the GeSI put in place. This is a very serious movement where any company that joins should know that should be verified, and the data that they are providing should be really real data. There is no place for any greenwashing, and it is our view that unless we move in this direction, we will not be going anywhere. We need to be serious. We need to take things very seriously, and we need to understand that communication is needed, but the communication needs to be a real communication, and we need to show progress. So this is my contribution to you. I hope that adds to the conversation, because one of the main components of our framework is around the avoided emissions component. the digital industry is probably the industry that can give the bigger contribution to reduce emissions in many different sectors and avoid emissions in many different sectors. So, Dennis, thank you so much for inviting me. And any question that you might have to me, just put it in the chat or send it over to me. I will be happy to respond.
Thank you very much, Lewis. And just thinking about the fact that Lewis is now in Japan in real time talking to us, the fact that we can do this now, it's quite fantastic also. And as Lewis was saying, I like that this avoided emissions is not something fancy on the side. It's absolutely necessary if we're going to get the passion and drivers and really got people to deliver on these things. And the kind of mapping that Gabby was showing, that there's so many people ready now here to deliver on those solutions, but we need to tap into that. And that Digital with Purpose is also about increasing the commitments as we move forward. I think it's very exciting. Maybe a disclosure also. Another hat I have is also head of strategy for Digital with Purpose, so I'm a bit biased on how well I like Digital with Purpose. But the fact that we cannot move this society without digitalization, and we need to put digital much more at the core in terms of business models, etc. But with that said, thank you very Lewis. I know it's very late for you, so understand if you need to switch off. But I really like to follow up where I ended before this little parenthesis, because this kind of business model innovation driven, Marco, you've been doing, it's been a pleasure to work with you over now quite a long time. And if you can share some of the thoughts of trying to push this solution agenda as a business consultant, where basically everyone else is trying to help companies to reduce their emissions, but coming in with this climate opportunity agenda and the kind of matrix that Gabby was talking about. The floor is yours.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you so much.
Can you guys hear me well? So pleasure to be here, and Dennis, thank you, frankly, for your inspiration in the last few years, but also brought us to create BCG Green Ventures. So I'm a partner in London, and I had the pleasure to work in climate for the past few years, but in particular to create BCG Green Ventures, which is basically the new unit of BCG, which really helps to either build or accelerate what we would like to think as future green unicorns. So our work goes from working with ventures in the ecosystem, but also working with corporates and working with funds. Maybe one insight which I think would be cool to share. Can you guys see this page? I think you can see it. We are on a sort of exponential curve, right? Which speaks super well to who works in the technology sector, and frankly understands avoided emissions very well. If we look at the value that is being generated here, I think this speaks by itself. There has been an acceleration in what we are defining as sort of, let's say, green unicorns. And really we can see in 2020, 2021, and we'll see in 2022, how many new companies can claim to have reached above 1 billion of value. Why I think this is important? Because it really helps us to flip the conversation for talking about climate as a challenge, as a cost, to talk about climate as an opportunity. And for me, avoided emissions and the solutions agenda is all about this. So in all the work that I do and we try to do is basically really flipping the conversation. This is not just about getting to net zero. This is first and foremost about creating better solutions and new value for corporates, for consumers, for countries. So really having this change of mindset, in my perspective, is super powerful. So what we have done a couple of years ago has been exactly with that logic, thinking about how can we work on climate innovation, right? And how can we be most useful, right, to climate action? And it's not just about what we do with our emissions, but it's really about the work that we do with our clients. And in particular with our clients, it's not just about the work that we do on their emissions, but how we use their capabilities, their assets to create innovation, to create new solutions, or to scale them. So BCG Green Ventures is that. We have created more than 40 or accelerated more than 40 green or climate ventures. We are very thesis-led in the approach. We have 10 opportunity spaces and around 30 places where we want to focus. We like to think that we do this not just as a standalone organization, but as I said, with clients, but also with a broader ecosystem of partners, including climate VCs. As mentioned, like these are the view of the opportunity spaces. The beautiful thing here is that the ecosystem is huge. It's huge. Like, we are going to remake the whole society, the whole economy. So like, this is extremely broad and exciting. And to conclude, basically what we do is, as mentioned, work with corporates. We look at basically what is their IP, their technologies, the ecosystem plays that they can do, but also working with ventures. And this is a bit of, let's say, a mission and passion that I have, is like, how can I bring the capabilities of the 25,000 BCGers around the world to work with an entrepreneur who has an amazing technology, but potentially struggling to scale the technology and the business model across. So this in a nutshell what we do. I think we also have time constraints, so I'll stop here and be open for questions.
Fantastic, Marco. And I think it's really interesting to see how this is moving into core business. And that's I was about to say the star of the show, Alex, we have 4 things that are in the pipeline to assess. 3 of them are ICT based, but the broadest and might be most exciting is the work that World Business Council for Sustainable Development is doing now, and that will be launched quite soon, and has been also a force and was part of the launch in Japan here also. So we really got the business and governments work together. Alex, the floor is yours. Tell us about the fantastic work you've been doing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dennis, for the invitation, and what a great panel you put together. So it's a pleasure to be here. I cannot be anymore with you at COP, so I already returned. So yes, it's all about how to drive from a reduction strategy from a mitigation strategy, a removals one, and adaptation, also looking at innovation. So what we are doing at the World Business Council, it is definitely, we all keep on track to meeting the 1.5 degrees target. So we heavily support everything that goes into the reduction piece. We just launched a new report on corporate accountability, which looks all on scope 1, 2, and 3. We also look at removals and adaptation. So what I speak now is really in addition, also as you framed it, Dennis. So it is what we see to happen in addition to the scope 1, 2, and 3 reduction. And I cannot emphasize this often enough, because this is really what we need to see as low carbon innovations. So we have been working over the past year with around 40 of our member companies, with Carbono 4 as a net zero initiative. Dennis, you also kindly supported us on a guidance on avoided emissions. And we are going to introduce this guidance very soon in Q1 of next year. And thereby, it's around 50, 60 pages. It's a kind of seed documents that can also further take it to some further standardization. It really should give yes, the credibility, consistency, the methodology of what we see can be accounted for as avoided emissions. So it is a kind of, yes, redefining the contribution of companies to global net zero and to support scaling innovative decarbonization solutions. So yes, it is part of the innovation agendas that you mentioned. We do see 3 core levers that avoided emissions can support to. It is the innovation piece, so I think we stressed this across all the panelists here today. It is on scaling, so we need to scale to get to reach to net zero. And it is also the accountability piece, so that companies can say, this is what we're doing on the mitigation piece, and here it is in addition how we further support to decarbonize, help to support decarbonize society. So to give you just a brief, concise nutshell of what we are doing, a sneak preview, and how this guidance will then unfold and what you can expect. So we will bring together the key concept and decisions on avoided emissions. We will look at the why, the innovations, the prioritization, and the demonstration of what companies are doing. We do have put quite a lot of effort together with the member companies, with Carbono 4, with our advisory board on eligibility criteria. So when are solutions that are there eligible to be claimed for to contribute to avoided emissions? We look at a bit on the accounting principles, the calculation guidelines, and then also provide a reporting framework, reporting guidance, so that this is all really helping to further spur innovation. And as we said before, we are all aware it might be a contested area of greenwashing, so our guidance, so we are very keen to raise the bar and to avoid greenwashing by using this guidance on avoided emissions. There are 3 eligibility gates. I don't want to go into all the details now, but that to get some kind of flavor. So we look at the climate action credibility. So has a company done anything they can on a science-based target, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 trajectory? Has it done their homework there? And then we look at gate 2, is the solution that is being proposed, is it compatible with the 1.5 degrees scenario? And we also look at the contribution legitimacy, so how much is the solution directly enabling a significant avoided emissions impact. So this is all based on the different scientific approaches that we have seen and that we are all aware. So this is really going into the same direction of further spurring innovation to a 1.5 degrees scenario. So there can be, if we are successful in that one, so I'm very excited that this become a kind of positive ambition loop to accelerate global net zero efforts. So businesses can prioritize markets and solutions with high decarbonization impact. Investors, as we have also heard before, so they can use this framework, this guidance to reallocate funding of saying, look, here really the potentials for further scaling innovation beyond scope 1, 2, and 3. Society is a human needs agenda, as you also pointed out quite often, Dennis. So the human needs agenda can be shift consumption to less carbon intensive solutions through informed purchasing decisions. And then as part of the governments, can governments also further advance climate policy measures to further support the development and the scaling of these solutions. We have seen it before, and Tomoki is on the panel here today as well. So it's a pleasure that we have gone into a collaboration as WBCSD together with METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan, and now together going to launch our WBCSD guidance early next year, and then to see how we can further bring it onto the global agenda of the G7, and then going forward into the next stages. So what can you expect from us here? As I said, watch out for the publication and to see how this one altogether, I think, it is still a lot where we need to get clarifications, getting more specific. So what we are bringing out is a first version of this guidance. So please join us all to make this even more consistent so that companies get the kind of support in really knowing if this is the way to go forward, they can get accredited, and we all can push further innovation towards a 1.5 agreed aligned pathway. Thank you very much, Dennis, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and taking this collaboration further.
Fantastic, Alex. And I think, and perfect professional panel also. We spot on time right now. So please an applause for the fantastic panel and what might be one of the most important processes moving forward. A solution agenda driven by passion and science. Thank you very much, everyone.